The Dominion had watched Earth for 30 years. Their observation ships sat at the edge of the solar system where no human telescope could find them. They recorded everything. They watched the armies march across continents. They watched the navies sail across blue oceans. They watched the aircraft carriers and the submarines and the missiles that could turn cities into ash. Admiral and stood before the Dominion Council with his report. His gray skin looked pale under the bright lights of the chamber. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he spoke. He had spent 10 years studying humanity, and what he found troubled him deeply. The humans were primitive. Their technology was centuries behind the Dominion. Their fastest ships could barely reach their own moon. Their weapons were crude explosions of fire and metal. They had no plasma cannons. They had no energy shields. They had nothing that should concern a civilization that had conquered 200 worlds. But N was concerned. The humans fought constantly. They fought each other over land and resources and ideas. They had developed weapons that could poison their entire planet. They had armies that numbered in the millions. Their soldiers trained for years to become efficient killers. Their history was written in blood and fire. The council listened as N explained what he had observed. Human soldiers could march for days without rest. They could survive in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. They ate almost anything. They drank water that would kill most species in the galaxy. They healed from wounds that should be fatal. And they never stopped fighting, even when they were outnumbered, even when victory was impossible. The humans kept fighting until they won or until they died. One council member asked if N was afraid of these primitives. The admiral did not answer immediately. He thought about the nuclear arsenals he had counted. He thought about the carrier groups that patrolled every ocean. He thought about the soldiers who jumped from aircraft into enemy territory just to kill and die for their nations. He admitted that he was not afraid, he was cautious. There was a difference. The council discussed what to do about Earth. Some wanted to ignore it. The humans were confined to their own system. They posed no immediate threat. Others wanted to make contact and bring humanity into the galactic community. Trade and diplomacy had worked with other aggressive species. But the majority wanted something else. They wanted to demonstrate Dominion power before the humans became too strong. A small strike against a minor target would show humanity that resistance was futile. The humans would submit and become useful servants of the Dominion. Was ordered to select a target and plan the assault. He chose carefully. The lunar research station called Artemis sat on the far side of Earth's moon. It housed 200 scientists who studied rocks and stars. It had a small security force with basic weapons. It was isolated and poorly defended. The perfect target. And assembled a strike force of 300 soldiers. They were veterans of dozens of campaigns. Their plasma rifles could cut through steel. Their armor could stop any projectile the humans possessed. They had fought species far more dangerous than these primitives. The admiral expected the mission to last less than 1 hour. His soldiers would land, eliminate any resistance, and secure the facility. The humans would see that their weapons were useless against Dominion technology. They would surrender and beg for mercy. What N did not know would cost him everything. Artemis Station was not just a research facility. Deep beneath its laboratories and living quarters was a training center that did not appear on any official record. The humans called it the Orbital Special Operations Group. It was their first attempt to create soldiers who could fight in space. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel commanded this secret unit. He was 42 years old with gray hair at his temples and scars on his hands. He had spent 20 years in special operations on Earth. He had fought in jungles and deserts and mountains. He had led missions that would never be acknowledged by any government. Now he trained 20 operators for a new kind of warfare. They learned to fight in low gravity and zero atmosphere. They learned to use the environment of space stations and lunar bases as weapons. They studied every system and every corridor of Artemis until they knew it better than their own homes. Had always believed that humanity would face alien contact someday. He hoped it would be peaceful. He prepared for it to be violent. His team trained for scenarios that most people thought were science fiction. They practiced defending against enemies with superior technology. They learned that advanced weapons meant nothing if you could not find your target. On the night the came was reviewing training schedules in his small office. The alarm came without warning. Sensors detected 3 ships approaching the station at impossible speed. They were not human ships. Moved quickly. He gathered his team in the lower levels where the training center was hidden. 20 operators stood before him in the dim light. They were men and women from different branches of the military. They had been selected for their ability to think and adapt and survive. He told them what was happening. Alien ships were coming. This was not a drill. They had minutes to prepare. Sergeant First Class Maria Vega asked how many enemies they would face. Admitted he did not know. He told her it did not matter. They would fight with what they had and they would win or they would die trying. The station shook as the first ship landed. Could hear the distant sound of explosions as the aliens destroyed the communication array. They were cut off from Earth. No one was coming to help them. 20 operators against an unknown enemy, with unknown weapons and unknown numbers. Looked at his team. These were the finest soldiers humanity had ever produced. They had trained for this moment even when everyone thought they were crazy. They were ready. He gave his orders. They would not defend the station. They would not hold positions or build barricades. They would disappear into the maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts they knew so well. Then they would hunt. They expected to find frightened scientists and poorly trained security guards. They expected an easy victory and a quick surrender. They had studied human military forces for 30 years and believed they understood the threat. They had never encountered anything like Daniel and his team. They had no category for soldiers who could vanish like smoke and strike like lightning. They did not know that Earth had been preparing warriors for thousands of years. The history of humanity was about to teach the Dominion a lesson it would never forget. Some prey had claws. Some victims fought back. Some primitives were far more dangerous than they appeared. The hunt was about to begin. Commander led his soldiers through the main airlock of Artemis Station. He was confident and eager for glory. This would be his first command of a ground assault, and he intended to make it perfect. 300 warriors followed him into the human facility with weapons ready and armor gleaming. The corridors were empty. The lights flickered overhead. The only sound was the hum of machinery and the footsteps of boots on metal floors. Ordered his troops to spread out and search the station. They moved in squads of 10, sweeping through laboratories and living quarters. They found abandoned meals still warm on tables. They found computers still running. They found personal belongings scattered as if the owners had left in a hurry. But they found no humans. The scientists and support staff had been evacuated to a secure bunker in the first minutes of the attack, had planned for this. The civilians were safe behind reinforced doors with enough supplies to last weeks. They would not interfere with what was about to happen. Grew frustrated. He had expected resistance. He had expected terrified humans begging for mercy. Instead, he found empty rooms and silence. He reported to Admiral that the station appeared abandoned. The Admiral ordered him to continue the search and secure all areas. In the darkness of the maintenance tunnels, Lieutenant Colonel watched through a small camera he had placed in the main corridor. He counted the enemy soldiers and studied their movements. He noted their weapons and their armor. He observed how they communicated and how they reacted to the empty station. They were nervous, good. Gathered his team in a junction deep beneath the station. 20 faces looked at him in the dim emergency lighting. He explained what he had seen. The enemy numbered around 300. They had plasma weapons that could cut through walls. Their armor looked strong, but he had noticed gaps at the joints where the plates connected. Sergeant First Class Maria Vega asked about the plan, smiled slightly. They would not attack the main force. They would pick off stragglers and scouts. They would make the enemy afraid to move in small groups. They would turn this station into a nightmare. The first strike came 30 minutes later. A squad of 10 soldiers entered the station's water recycling facility. It was a maze of pipes and tanks and narrow walkways. Perfect hunting ground. Vega led a team of 4 operators through vents that the aliens did not know existed. They waited in the darkness above the main chamber. They moved carelessly with their weapons lowered. They had found nothing threatening in the entire station. They had grown complacent. Vega gave the signal. The operators dropped from the ceiling like shadows. They carried no firearms. Gunshots would echo through the station and reveal their position. Instead, they used knives and garrotes in their bare hands. The first 2 died before they knew they were under attack. Vega drove her blade through the gap in a soldier's neck armor. Beside her, Corporal Timothy strangled another with a wire. The remaining 8 aliens turned in confusion and panic. It was over in less than a minute. 10 soldiers lay dead on the floor. Not one had managed to fire a shot or send a warning. Vega and her team disappeared back into the vents before the bodies were even cold. Received the report with disbelief. An entire squad eliminated with no contact and no warning. He demanded to know how this was possible. His officers had no answers. He ordered his troops to stay in groups of at least 30. No more small patrols. No more isolated searches. They would move as a unified force and crush whatever resistance remained. Had anticipated this. Large groups were slow and loud. They could not search effectively. They would miss the small spaces and hidden passages where his team lived. Staff Sergeant led the next phase of the operation. His specialty was psychological warfare. He had studied the language and customs from intercepted transmissions over the years. He knew what would frighten them. They came from a world with no large predators. They had evolved as the dominant species on their planet. They had never experienced the fear of being hunted, intended to give them that experience. He accessed the station's environmental controls from a hidden terminal. The temperature in the main corridors began to fluctuate wildly. Hot then cold, then hot again. The air circulation system made strange sounds like breathing. The lights dimmed and flickered in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Then the speakers crackled to life. Had recorded sounds from Earth. The growl of a tiger, the howl of wolves, the scream of a mountain lion. He played them through the station's communication system at random intervals. The sounds echoed through empty corridors and bounced off metal walls. They did not know what these sounds meant, but something deep in their biology recognized danger. Their hearts beat faster. Their hands trembled on their weapons. They began to look over their shoulders at every shadow. Demanded that his technicians find and disable the sound system. They tried, but the controls had been locked with encryption they could not break. The human who designed this system had made it specifically to resist enemy takeover. By the end of the first day, they had lost 40 soldiers. Some died in ambushes like the first squad. Others were found alone in corridors with their throats cut, separated from their units in the confusion. 2 had apparently shot each other in the darkness when they mistook movement for an enemy. Gathered his remaining troops in the station's central hub. It was a large open space with clear sight lines in all directions. He would make his stand here and force the humans to attack him directly. He still believed he was fighting a conventional enemy. He still thought that superior numbers and firepower would win this battle. He did not understand that Daniel had no intention of fighting fair. Watched from the shadows and smiled. The enemy had done exactly what he wanted. They had gathered in one place where they could not search and could not advance. They were afraid and confused and making mistakes. The real operation was about to begin. He signaled Chief Warrant Officer Lisa. Her team had a special mission. While the coward in the central hub, she would hit them where they least expected. Their ships. The landing craft sat unguarded on the lunar surface. Every soldier was inside the station looking for ghosts, led 4 operators through an airlock that the aliens had not bothered to secure. They crossed the gray lunar dust in silence. The ships loomed ahead of them, dark shapes against the stars, felt the weight of history on her shoulders. These were the first alien vessels that humans had ever touched. She intended to make that touch count. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa moved through the airlock of the first ship. Her team followed in silence. They had trained for months to operate in the vacuum of space and the low gravity of the moon. Every movement was careful and precise. The ship's interior was strange and alien. The walls curved in ways that made no sense to human eyes. The control panels displayed symbols that meant nothing, but was not here to fly the ship. She was here to cripple it. Her team spread out through the vessel. They found the food storage and contaminated it with compounds that would cause severe illness. They found the water tanks and added chemicals that would make the liquid taste foul but remain technically safe. They wanted the uncomfortable but alive. Dead enemies could not spread fear. In the engine room, found what she was really looking for. The communication array that connected this ship to Admiral and's command vessel. She did not destroy it. Instead, she attached a small device that her technicians had built for exactly this purpose. It would intercept and record all transmissions. More importantly, she modified the ship's transponder codes. It was delicate work that took nearly an hour. When she was finished, the fleet's targeting computers would identify this ship as friendly. The same modification was made to all 3 landing craft. Before leaving, wrote a message on the wall of the main cabin. She used the blood of a ration pack that looked disturbingly like meat. The message was simple: we are everywhere. They would find it when they finally returned to their ships. Back inside the station, Commander was losing control. His soldiers had been trapped in the central hub for 6 hours. They were tired and hungry and terrified. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow seemed to hide death. Had sent 3 more patrols to search for the enemy. None had returned. His force of 300 had been reduced to just over 200. They had not killed a single human. He contacted Admiral and requested reinforcements. The Admiral's response was cold. Had 300 soldiers against a handful of primitives. If he could not handle this situation, perhaps someone else should command. Ended the transmission with shame burning in his chest. He would prove himself worthy. He would find these humans and destroy them. Lieutenant Colonel observed the enemy commander through cameras hidden throughout the hub. He could see the desperation in its movements. The alien was making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. That made him predictable. Called his team together for the next phase. They had weakened the enemy physically. Now they would break them mentally. Staff Sergeant had prepared for this moment. He had studied psychology through years of intercepted communications. He knew their fears and their beliefs. He knew that they considered themselves the supreme predators of the galaxy. Time to show them otherwise. Access the station's holographic display system. It was designed for scientific presentations, but he had it for a different purpose. At random intervals, images would appear in corridors and rooms throughout the station. The first image showed a human soldier standing over a dead. The image flickered and vanished before anyone could react. Minutes later, another image appeared in a different location. This one showed dozens of bodies piled in a corridor. The images were fake, but they did not know that. They began to believe they were facing hundreds of human soldiers. They began to think that their entire force was being systematically exterminated. Received panicked reports from his officers. The humans were everywhere. They could appear and disappear at will. They were killing soldiers faster than anyone could count. The reality was much simpler. Had 16 operators remaining after the ship mission. They moved through the station like ghosts, striking isolated targets and then melting back into the darkness. But the illusions made 16 seem like 100. Corporal Timothy approached with a suggestion. He volunteered to be captured. They were desperate for information. A prisoner would give them hope, and that prisoner could feed them lies. Considered the risk, could be tortured or killed, but the young corporal was determined. He understood what was at stake, finally agreed but gave strict instructions, would reveal only what they wanted the enemy to know. An hour later, walked into the central hub with his hands raised. They surrounded him with weapons drawn. They could not believe that a human had simply surrendered. It had to be a trap. Interrogated the prisoner personally, played his role perfectly. He pretended to be a frightened survivor, the last of the station's security force. He told the commander that there were only 5 humans left. They were hiding in the East Wing, planning a final desperate attack. Wanted to believe him. The alternative was too terrible to accept. He ordered 100 soldiers to sweep the East Wing and eliminate the remaining resistance. Finally, this nightmare would end. The soldiers moved through the corridors toward the East Wing. They were eager for combat after hours of fear and waiting. They checked every room and every corner with weapons ready. They did not notice the thin wires stretched across doorways. They did not see the small packages attached to support beams. They did not realize they were walking into a kill zone that had been prepared days before the invasion. Sergeant First Class Maria Vega watched from a safe distance. She held a small detonator in her hand. 100 enemy soldiers filled the corridors of the East Wing. They were packed together in the narrow spaces, exactly where had wanted them. She pressed the button. The explosion tore through 3 levels of the station. Fire and debris filled the corridors. The reinforced walls contained most of the blast, but nothing could save the soldiers caught inside. 60 died instantly. 30 more were wounded badly. Only 10 escaped without injury. The sound of the explosion echoed through the entire station. Felt the floor shake beneath his feet. He knew immediately that something catastrophic had happened. When the survivors staggered back to the central hub, they were broken. Their armor was scorched and cracked. Their eyes were empty. They reported what had happened in hollow voices. Looked at his remaining force. He had started with 300 elite soldiers. Now he had fewer than 100, many of them wounded. The humans had suffered no casualties that he knew of. He finally understood the truth. He was not fighting soldiers. He was fighting something far more dangerous, something his training and experience had never prepared him for. He was fighting predators who had perfected the art of war over thousands of years of bloody conflict, and they were just getting started. Admiral and stood on the bridge of his command vessel and listened to the distress call from the surface. Commander's voice was barely recognizable. The confident officer who had led 300 soldiers into battle now sounded like a frightened child. The admiral demanded a full report. What he heard made his blood run cold. 60 soldiers killed in a single explosion. Dozens more lost in ambushes throughout the station. The humans had not engaged in direct combat even once. They struck from shadows and vanished like spirits. They turned the station itself into a weapon. And had conquered worlds. He had crushed rebellions and destroyed armies. But he had never heard anything like this. His soldiers were being hunted by creatures they could not see, could not track, and could not fight. He asked how many humans they faced. The commander admitted he did not know. The prisoner had said 5, but that seemed impossible. The attacks came from everywhere at once. There had to be more. And reviewed the tactical data from the soldiers' armor cameras. The footage was chaotic and confusing. Brief glimpses of movement in darkness. The sound of screaming. bodies falling without any visible attacker. One clip showed a soldier walking down a corridor. He was alert and cautious with his weapon raised. Nothing seemed wrong. Then something dropped from the ceiling behind him. A human. The footage lasted 3 more seconds before the camera went dark. The Admiral watched the clip repeatedly. The human moved with terrifying efficiency. No wasted motion. No hesitation. This was not a soldier defending his home. This was a predator doing what evolution had designed it to do. He made a decision. The mission had failed. There was no point in sacrificing more soldiers for a minor research station. He would eliminate the threat from orbit, and ordered his weapons officer to target Artemis Station. The plasma batteries could reduce the entire facility to slag in seconds. The humans and the remaining soldiers would die together. It was unfortunate but necessary. The targeting computer locked onto the station. The weapons charged and prepared to give the order. Then the computer displayed a warning. 4 friendly vessels detected in the target zone. The Admiral checked the readings. The 3 landing craft on the lunar surface were broadcasting identification codes, his own ships. He could not fire without destroying them. He ordered the targeting officer to recalibrate. The computer checked again and returned the same result. The vessels were clearly marked as Dominion craft. The weapons would not fire on friendly targets. And realized what had happened. The humans had modified the transponders. They had turned his own ships into shields. They had anticipated that he would try orbital bombardment, and they had prepared for it. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa's work on the landing craft had served its purpose perfectly. She had given the humans protection against the most powerful weapon the Dominion possessed. Inside the station, Lieutenant Colonel received word that the orbital strike had been prevented. He allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The enemy was running out of options. But the situation remained dangerous. Nearly 100 soldiers still occupied the central hub. They were frightened and demoralized, but they still had weapons. A cornered enemy could be unpredictable. Decided to increase the pressure. He wanted them to break completely. He wanted them to beg for escape. Master Sergeant led the next operation. Her team had been preparing something special in the station's machine shop. They had built crude drones from spare parts and maintenance equipment. The drones were slow and clumsy, but they could carry cameras and speakers. At midnight station time, the drones entered the central hub. They flew in slow circles above the gathered soldiers. Their cameras recorded everything. Their speakers played a simple message in the language. "We are watching, we are waiting, we are coming." They opened fire. Plasma bolts filled the air as soldiers shot wildly at the small machines. The drones were destroyed in seconds, but they had served their purpose. The aliens had wasted ammunition and energy on harmless targets. More importantly, they had demonstrated their fear. Screamed at his soldiers to hold their fire. They were losing discipline. They were becoming a mob instead of a military unit. Watched through hidden cameras and made his assessment. The enemy was close to collapse. One more push would break them completely. He gave orders to his remaining operators. They would make their presence known. They would let see them, not to fight but to remind the aliens that death was always nearby. Sergeant First Class Maria Vega appeared at the edge of the central hub. She stood in a doorway for exactly 5 seconds, clearly visible in the light. Then she stepped back into the shadows and was gone. 10 minutes later, Staff Sergeant did the same on the opposite side of the hub. Then another operator. Then another. They appeared and vanished like ghosts, never staying long enough to be targeted. They saw humans everywhere. Every doorway could hide death. Every shadow could conceal a killer. They could not sleep. They could not rest. They could only wait for the end. Contacted Admiral and one final time. He begged for extraction. He admitted that the mission had failed and that his soldiers would die if they stayed. He asked the admiral to save whoever could be saved. Faced an impossible choice. He could not destroy the station without hitting his own ships. He could not send reinforcements because he had none to spare. He could only watch his soldiers die slowly or pull them out and accept defeat. The admiral thought about what this would mean for his career. He thought about the shame of retreating from primitives. He thought about the reports he would have to file and the explanations he would have to give. Then he thought about the footage from those armor cameras, the humans dropping from ceilings, the soldiers dying without ever seeing their attackers, the screams in the darkness. He ordered the retreat. Shuttles would collect whoever could reach the landing zone. The wounded would be left behind. There was no time for mercy. Received the news with relief and horror. Relief that escape was possible. Horror that he would have to abandon his wounded soldiers to the humans. He gathered those who could walk and began the march to the landing craft. 73 soldiers remained combat-capable. They moved through the corridors in a tight formation with weapons pointed in every direction. The humans did not attack. Watched them go and felt something like pity. These soldiers had come to conquer. They had expected easy victory against primitive creatures. They had not understood that humanity had been perfecting the art of war since before their civilization existed. They would carry this lesson back to the stars. They would tell their people what happened when you underestimated the children of Earth. That story would be worth more than any victory. The surviving reached their landing craft without incident. Lieutenant Colonel had ordered his team to stand down. The aliens were broken. They were defeated. There was no need to kill them when they could serve a greater purpose. Commander was the last to board the shuttle. He paused at the airlock and looked back at the station that had become a house of horrors. 73 soldiers had survived from a force of 300. They had not killed a single confirmed human. A figure emerged from the shadows of the landing zone, raised his weapon but did not fire. The human walked toward him slowly with hands visible and empty. It was the leader, the one who had orchestrated this nightmare. Stopped a few meters from the commander. The two enemies studied each other in the pale light of the stars. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally asked the question that had haunted him since the first attack. "What are you?" Considered his answer. He thought about the centuries of warfare that had shaped humanity. He thought about the countless conflicts that had forged soldiers into something more than ordinary people. He thought about the men and women who had served in the shadows, fighting wars that would never be acknowledged. He told that they were special forces. They did not fight wars in the traditional sense. They ended them before they truly began. They were the blade in the darkness that enemies never saw coming. Shook his head slowly. His people had conquered 200 worlds. They had defeated civilizations with technology far beyond human capability. They had believed themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They had been wrong. He asked why he had allowed them to leave. The humans could have killed every last. They had proven they had the ability. Explained his reasoning. Dead soldiers told no stories. Living survivors would return home and spread the truth. They would tell their people what happened when you attacked Earth. They would describe the ghosts in the darkness and the death that came without warning. Fear was a weapon more powerful than any bomb. Understood. He was being sent home as a messenger. His shame and terror would serve the humans better than his corpse ever could. It was brilliant and cruel and utterly effective. He boarded the shuttle without another word. The ships lifted off from the lunar surface and accelerated toward the command vessel. Watched them go until they were nothing but points of light among the stars. Admiral and received the survivors in silence. He saw their empty eyes and trembling hands. He heard their fragmented accounts of what had happened. He reviewed the footage from their armor cameras and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. He ordered the fleet to withdraw from human space immediately. There would be no further contact with Earth. No more observation. No more plans for conquest. The humans were to be avoided at all costs. The journey back to territory took 3 weeks. In that time, the story spread through the fleet. Soldiers whispered about the ghosts of Artemis Station. They described humans who could walk through walls and kill without sound. They spoke of primitives who had defeated the Dominion's finest warriors without losing a single fighter. The story grew with each telling. By the time the fleet reached home, the humans had become monsters, unstoppable killers who lived for battle, predators who hunted for sport, creatures from a death world who feared nothing. The Dominion Council met in emergency session. They watched the footage and read the reports. They saw 300 elite soldiers reduced to terrified survivors by a handful of humans. They calculated what would happen if Earth sent its full military might against the Dominion. The vote was unanimous. All operations in human space were canceled permanently. The observation posts were recalled. The invasion plans were destroyed. Earth would be left alone. One council member asked what they would tell their people. The truth would damage Dominion prestige across the galaxy. The admiral suggested a simple solution. They would say nothing. The mission to Artemis Station had never happened. The 300 soldiers who died were lost in a training accident. The survivors were sworn to secrecy under penalty of death, but secrets have a way of escaping. Stories spread through back channels and unofficial networks. Within months, every spacefaring civilization in the sector knew about the humans who had defeated the Dominion. The legend of Earth's Special Forces was born. Back on Artemis Station, Lieutenant Colonel filed his after-action report. It was classified at the highest level and stored in a vault that only 3 people on Earth could access. The official record stated that the station had experienced a minor technical malfunction during a routine training exercise. 20 operators had fought and won humanity's first interstellar battle. They received no medals. They received no recognition. They received no glory. They received something more valuable, a new mission. They were not the only civilization watching Earth. Others would come with the same intentions. They would study human military forces and believe they understood the threat. They would plan their invasions and prepare their armies. They would fail. Sergeant First Class Maria Vega asked what came next. He told her they would train. They would prepare. They would be ready for whatever the galaxy threw at them. The universe was vast and full of dangers. Humanity was small and young and primitive by galactic standards, but they had something that older civilizations had forgotten. They had the will to survive at any cost. They had the creativity to fight in ways their enemies could not imagine. They had soldiers who would walk into certain death and find a way to win. The stars looked down on a small blue world that had just announced its presence to the galaxy. The message was simple and clear. Do not come here looking for easy prey. Do not mistake our small numbers for weakness. Do not think that your advanced technology will protect you. We are humanity. We have been fighting since before we left the caves. We have turned war into a science and killing into an art. We will not be conquered. We will not be enslaved. We will not go quietly into the darkness. Come if you dare, we will be waiting. Somewhere in the distant reaches of the galaxy, another civilization was making plans for Earth. They had heard rumors about what happened to but they dismissed them as exaggeration. No primitive species could defeat a superior force so completely. They began assembling their fleet. They began training their soldiers. They began dreaming of the resources and slaves they would take from this insignificant world. They had no idea what was coming for them. Daniel stood on the lunar surface and looked up at the stars. He knew more enemies would come. He knew the battles ahead would be harder. He knew that some of his people would not survive. But he also knew that humanity would endure. They always had. They always would. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson the hard way.